Welcome back to the program. Before we get into tonight's topics, I wanted to bring something to everyone's attention. One of my openings, one of my intros from many, many years ago, said something that finally even President Trump has basically said in his State of the Union address or address to Congress. At one point in that address, he looks over at the Democrats and he says, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can say that will make you happy. There's nothing I can do to make you clap. There really is nothing that I can do. And then he ended up going on and talking a little bit further, saying that I could come up with the greatest cures for, diseases and things like that, and you still would sit there and not clap. And it reminded me of one of my openings that you may remember. When I said back in, I want to say 2020, somewhere around there, I said, President Trump could cure cancer tomorrow and rescue kittens from a burning building, and they'd still call him a piece of shit. I was correct. And it's interesting to hear the President of the United States kind of allude to that fact, 5 years later, that he now understands that as well. And it was interesting that the American people got a chance to hear President Trump actually say that. It kind of vindicates what I have been saying all along, that it doesn't matter what he does. They're always going to hate him. They won't even cheer for children that survive cancer. They won't cheer for a young lady who is partially paralyzed and had operations due to being hit in the face by a male in a female-only volleyball game. And of course, all the other people and people that were victims, sadly, of the illegal immigrants allowed in the country, they couldn't clap. That's a nonpartisan issue. You're supposed to support your fellow Americans. It's not supposed to be partisan. Just because President Trump brought them to the address to Congress, we have to sit on our hands and remain silent. Well, the American people had a chance to see it, and they are not too happy about it. So keep it up, Democrats. That's all I can say. But, for the longest time, we basically have been dealing with Joe Biden. We know that he's illegitimate, number one. Number two, we know that he's not cognitively there at all. We have seen and watched him. We started pointing that out when he was running back in 2020, when he was losing. Remember, he lost Iowa. He lost the next state after that. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was New Hampshire. And then in South Carolina, you had Clyburn come in and endorse him, and that's when he won. He won South Carolina, and then from there, they put in this AstroTurf campaign that somehow he was, the standard bearer of the party. Meanwhile, he didn't even know who he was even back then, okay? And then they pumped him full of all kinds of, memory-enhancing drugs to get him through the debates. But obviously, eventually, time catches up with people, and you can't hide it anymore. And of course, when he did the debate with President Trump, that's when the American people finally got a chance to see it all. But we've known for the longest time, we've known for over 5 years that the guy was not there. So if they ran this guy and they got him selected through voter fraud and they allowed him to quote unquote serve, who was really running the White House? We saw him shaking hands with imaginary people, calling his wife his sister, walking into the woods. I mean, we've seen it all. Slipping, falling. He is nowhere near the person that he was years ago. And remember, at some point in his career, he was pretty sharp. Look at the debate that he did with Paul Ryan. He was pretty, sharp. He was lying, of course, but at least he was sharp. He could put his words together, his thoughts together. He could articulate ideas. Not anymore, and clearly not the last 5 years. So that begs the question, who signed all of these quote-unquote bills, policies, executive orders, etc.? Well, we know that it wasn't him. So who was it? Well, that's the question we need to find out. But this is an explosive story that is coming out from the investigators at the Heritage Foundation and their oversight project led by longtime investigator Mike Howell. He has compared the Biden signatures on just about nearly every document from his administration, and they can find, without a shadow of a doubt, that obviously Biden has never actually signed anything himself. Let me repeat that. Biden himself, with his own hand, has never signed anything himself. It's all been through automated, auto pen or whatever you want to call it. So the Oversight Committee is now gathering these documents, and they are going to present them to a court. And I think at some point we might be able to overturn everything that this fake president has been able to do to harm the American people. And the only ones that are going to be able to do that is if the Department of Justice takes this case and brings it to the Supreme Court. Because if we can prove that all of these signatures were not done by him and done by somebody else, then all of them should be nullified over time. And I've said that for the longest time, that he's not signing these documents, it's not him in control, so everything should be nullified once we find that out. So let's see. Let's get into it a little bit and more. So here is the oversight project and some of the things that they have to say. They use the same auto pen signature, except for the announcement that the former president was dropping out of the race last year. Here is the auto pen signature, and they're showing you different examples of it. Here is the signature from the letter announcing Biden was dropping out of the race. And they break it down even further because Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey has asked the Department of Justice to investigate whether Biden's cognitive decline allowed unelected officials to make decisions without his knowledge or approval. Now, you may remember before Kash Patel was put up, I said that Andrew Bailey, the Attorney General of Missouri, would have been a great choice if not Kash Patel. But of course, Kash Patel is the better choice. But he would absolutely have been second choice, or maybe even Ken Paxton for that matter. So this is the guy, Missouri versus Biden. They also enjoined with the Gateway Pundit and some others to basically go after, these people that were doing the Twitter files and everything else, and Facebook censorship and all the different censoring that we saw. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. And of course, the Trump hater leftist, Amy Coney Barrett, sided with the devils on the other side and squashed it. She's going to be a problem, folks. She is a problem. President Trump should have picked the Cuban-American woman who was from Miami. She would have been much better for the Supreme Court than this idiot. So they are now looking into it. They are asking the Department of Justice to get involved, which is great, which is really, really good news because, look, if we can get to the bottom of it, find out who is using the signature, and even if we can't find that out, but we can just prove without a shadow of a doubt through forensic experts, handwriting analysis experts, all of that, that he did not sign any of these orders, laws, bills, legislation, whatever it may be, guess what? We should be able to then get a nullification for the last 4 miserable, disgusting, horrible communist years. We'll see what happens. Okay, the other thing I wanted to run by you real quick is when Gene Hackman and his wife were found dead, everyone suspected it was carbon monoxide poisoning. Well, they've ruled out that it was not. So now the autopsy and the reports have come in, and what they are finding is that he was suffering from severe dementia, which was a significant factor in his death. But more importantly, he had a major, massive heart attack. He was 95 years old, and I don't know what the pills were doing. Maybe he was trying to get to his pills, his nitroglycerin pills, whatever it might have been, before he, fell down and died. But basically, his pacemaker registered that he stopped breathing and stopped living, for that matter, on February 17th. Well, here's what's even more interesting. It turns out Arakawa, his wife, died February 11th. And this is interesting. She died of hantavirus poisoning. Now, if you don't know what that is, it is the bacteria in mouse and rat droppings that people breathe in, especially if you're breathing it in an area that's not very ventilated. So if you live in Arizona, if you live in New Mexico, if you live in Texas, if you live in Colorado, or if you live in Utah, that is something that people need to be cognizant of. And so she actually died from hantavirus more than anything else, and she was younger than him. And she died on the 11th. So he might not even have known that she was dead because he had dementia. And so who was feeding the dog? Well, now we know probably why the dog died. It probably died of starvation because nobody was feeding it because everyone was dead or demented. Sad ending to one of the great actors. Okay, next. Promises kept. President Trump and his administration have announced that they have cut $400 million in federal funding to the communists and the Jew haters at Columbia University, citing school's failure to address the rising anti-Semitism on campus. President Trump is not playing around. And $400 million is a lot of money to a school that depends on that type of federal funding. Clean your act up, Columbia, Yale, Harvard, all the Ivy League schools out there, and any other college out there that is going to allow these rabid Hamas-supporting scumbags to run around and chase down Jews on campus. No more. New sheriff in town. Good news on that one. Okay, the Department of Justice is finally starting to identify some of these Chinese nationals that Biden let in the country. There was many videos, I reported on it in the past. You had these well-dressed Chinese businessmen on their cell phones with like really expensive luggage with the rollers and everything else, just on their cell phones, just walking into the country. These were not poor, disparaged refugees looking to escape violence or looking for a better life. No, these were the best of the CCP's infiltrators. These were scientists. These were molecular biologists. These were experts in nuclear fusion and technology. These were, virologists. These were the people that they brought here and sent to the United States through Colombia, by the way, and had them flown into the country, or in some respects, some of them actually flew into Canada and just walked across the border into the United States of America. So they have identified them, and not only have they identified them, but they have also now identified some of the companies directly involved with the Mexican drug cartels that have been supplying the fentanyl, which has been killing our people. The Department of Justice has identified Chinese nationals and companies that have been directly aiding the Mexican drug cartels. This raises troubling questions, especially if the cartels are designated as foreign terrorist organizations. One of the executive orders signed by President Donald Trump on the first day, January 20th, is called Designating Cartels and Other Organizations as Foreign Terrorist Organizations and Specially Designated Global Terrorist Groups. This order was a presidential direction to add the Mexican drug cartels to the list of foreign terrorist organizations. The scourge of fentanyl can be traced directly to the cartels and is killing, as I said earlier, thousands of Americans per month. Combined drug overdoses in the United States leave about 120,000 people dead per year. At this rate, if no action is taken to address it, the number of overdoses will surpass the number of Americans killed in World War II, which was 407,000 within only a couple of years. In the order, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was given the lead to develop the final list of groups to be designated as terrorist organizations. The State Department is reported to have created a tentative list of 8 groups to be placed on the former terrorist organization list. Let's see here. This is from Marco Rubio. They've controlled they've controlled by drug cartels the southern border and most of Central America. They are the most powerful force on the ground, and they are plowing into the United States. They're facilitating illegal migration, but they are also bringing in hundreds of thousands of pounds of fentanyl and deadly drugs into our country each year. It's a national security threat, and it needs to stop. CCP's unrestricted warfare. In April of 2023, a U.S. court named 4 Chinese nationals who had allegedly collaborated with Mexican drug cartels on fentanyl production. Keng Jiang, Yanghui Wu, and Hu Tao Yao were identified as defendants and the Chinese suppliers of fentanyl precursors to the cartels in Mexico. They sourced the precursor chemicals from the company's factory in China and delivered these chemicals to cartels in Mexico with the full knowledge that the intent was to send the fentanyl into the United States of America for full distribution. Doug Livermore, Vice President of the Board of Directors for the Special Operations Association of America and also a Special Operations veteran, said, quote, "The Mexican cartels are enabled and supplied by Chinese-based criminal organizations, including Chinese companies that knowingly provide fentanyl and precursor chemicals to the cartels to produce the drugs that are pumped into the United States, and Chinese financial institutions that facilitate the transfer of this money into and out of our country to expand their own criminal enterprises." According to Livermore, the Chinese Communist Party embraces the doctrine of unrestricted warfare, which clearly calls for the use of the illicit narcotics trade as a tool for undermining strategic competitors, specifically the United States of America. He noted that this demonstrates the clear strategy behind the CCP's policies enabling the Mexican drug cartels. So there you have it. They're now identifying who these people are, rounding them up, and hopefully arresting them and indicting them and stopping the flow of fentanyl. But more importantly, that list of the organizations, the cartels, Trendiagra, MS-13, I don't know, there's so many of them. They are now being told, or President Trump and his administration is telling Mexico, if you don't take out these cartels, we will do it for you. And from what I can tell, Mexican officials are now starting to crack down because I guess they don't want the United States to be firing off drones and killing all these drug cartels. And again, these drug cartels make a lot of money. A lot of these Mexican officials and people in the Mexican government are all baked in. They are all run and controlled by these Mexican drug cartels. And so there's a lot of this. There's a lot of cashish running around. And so that's why the Mexican drug cartels have been bought off, scared, fear for their life. I mean, how many Mexican officials have been beheaded or been murdered as soon as they announce that they're running for office and things like that? There's been so many of them in every single Mexican territory that have been murdered and killed and found their heads missing and all this other crazy stuff because the drug cartels run Mexico. Well, you're not going to run the United States of America, and if you continue to do it, we're going to send boots on the ground into Mexico, or we're going to drone strike the compounds in Mexico, and we're going to obliterate all of these drug cartels. So we'll see what happens with that. All right, the next thing. This was kind of an interesting one. Let me see if I have it right here. So let's talk about this. So Puerto Rico, okay, is the Commonwealth, right? It's a territory. It's like I said, it's not a state, thank God, and it's not an independent nation or a sovereign nation either. It's just basically an island that is a commonwealth that is basically leeching off, and I'll use those words, leeching off and sponging off of the United States of America. Well, it's possible that President Trump could see an end to that because he's looking to cut money anywhere he can find it. And apparently, right now, it looks as though Puerto Rico is costing the United States of America over $600 billion a year. Okay? and it's ridiculous. So, the bottom line is this. Could Puerto Rico be forced, that's right, forced, to become an independent sovereign nation that is independent and self-sufficient from the United States of America? Well, God, let's hope so, okay? Seriously, let's hope so. Now, before I read it and get into it, only 11% of Puerto Ricans want to secede or be their own independent nation and be self-sufficient and have their own sovereignty. Only 11%. 58% want statehood. Now, why is that a horrific idea? I'll tell you why. Because number one, if God forbid Democrats get back in power in the future, there's two things they want to do to consolidate their power to stay in power for the foreseeable future. Number one, they want to make the DC swamp have statehood so that it's its own separate state rather than just the District of Columbia. What will that do? Well, very simple. It will add congressional seats that will almost 100% be for Democrats, and it will at least add one, if not two, but probably at least one extra U.S. senator, which you already know the answer to that, will be another Democrat. Now, Puerto Rico, God forbid, becoming a state of the United States, guess what? More congressional seats, which definitely won't be Republican, and at least one, if not two, extra senators. So what does this all translate to? It translates into this is how the left would codify their power and keep Republicans from ever winning the House and the Senate ever again. That's what, okay? And nobody's going to tell you that but me. So I am 100% for President Trump issuing an executive order and kicking these leeches, that's what I'll call them, these leeches out and forcing them to have their own independent nation and sovereignty. Now, maybe some Puerto Ricans are going to hear this and not like what I said. Good. I don't care. I don't want you sponging off the United States of America anymore. And it's to the tune of $617 billion. Thank you. So let's read this one. Donald Trump is being lobbied to make Puerto Rico an independent nation and save American taxpayers $617.8 billion, the dailymail.com has learned. At least two congressional offices are in possession of a 7-page draft executive order on how the United States can help the island territory transition into an independent nation. One individual familiar with the document's origin said at least two members of Congress have a current copy of the draft, which the dailymail.com has obtained and reviewed. A source familiar with this document existence discovered and disclosed that it is also in the possession of Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, and White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, as well as Representative Tom McClintock, Republican California, and possibly a few other people not mentioned. Staffers for the Senate Energy and National Resources Committee and a staffer for Representative Tom Keene, Republican of New Jersey, have already held or scheduled meetings about the draft executive order. The committee has jurisdiction over issues relating to Puerto Rico and other U.S. territories, but committee officials did not reply to a request for comment. The order appears to have been drawn up by a congressional office and leaders of the Puerto Rico secessionist movement, but not the White House themselves. But it is clear that an effort to apply pressure on the White House to transition Puerto Rico out of its current status as a U.S. territory certainly does exist. Trump has not indicated that he wants to rid the United States of the territory, at least not publicly. And then it goes on to say, the White House declined to comment on the draft order and appears to be unaware of its origins. According to the document, the effort seeks to establish the Caribbean island as a sovereign and independent nation and, in the process, decouple itself financially and from security interests of those of the United States. Copies of the proposed executive action have been circulating in a few Capitol Hill offices. Spokespeople for Gabbard and McClintock did not respond to the Daily Mail for comment. One person familiar with the effort said that a field representative for Congressman Kane is aware of the document but did not reveal how the congressman or his staff might be involved. The draft is made to look like an executive order that is written as though it were authored or at least authorized by President Trump himself. It includes a line for Donald J. Trump to add his signature and a March 2025 date in which the actual day is left blank. Amid a myriad of Trump shakeups, including cutting waste and government abuse and all that, and billions of dollars in fake contracts and entire agencies themselves, the draft seeks to cut the fat off of the U.S. budget that is allocated to the island territory. Let's see, and then they talk about Tony Hinchcliffe and what he said at the RNC. You know, big deal there. It's just a joke, guys. Relax. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem visited Puerto Rico last week. During her first visit to the U.S. territory as part of Trump's cabinet, she pledged to help Puerto Rico as it struggles to rebuild from the catastrophic hurricanes amid chronic power outages. So then it goes on to talk about how the Puerto Rican people are actually against this. Here it is. Of the votes of the non-binding voter preference measure in 2024, 58% say they want statehood, while only 11% would like to be an independent nation. So, I really would love to see Puerto Rico removed from the United States as a territory and forced to create themselves as an independent sovereign nation. Now, more than anything else, not because I want them to not be part of the United States, I don't want the Democrats in the future to have access to creating statehood for them. That's why I am for this executive order. And I do hope that President Trump follows through and actually signs this executive order. Look, we don't want Canada to be another state. That would be a disaster. We don't want Puerto Rico to be another state. That would be a disaster. We don't want Washington, D.C. to be another state. That would be a disaster. So I don't understand all this talk about somehow turning in these countries or territories into new states. I mean, it's political suicide. How do they not understand that? I don't understand it myself, but you know what? We're going to keep on it. We're going to keep fighting for it, and we got to make sure that none, absolutely none of these countries or territories ever gain statehood, or we are going to be in the minority for the foreseeable future. Those are my thoughts. What are yours? Put them down in the comments below. We'll see you in the next one.